Greens. You have the call.
Thank you very much. And I too rise to speak on the Greens motion in continued support of what history will record as the greatest financial fraud on Australian taxpayers, I think, in our nation's history, and the cruelest financial fraud on Australians. The lack of transparency, which other senators have again reminded those in this place and all Australians, is shocking. Not only has the minister for over 12 months come in here and flouted the direction of this place, of the Senate, to provide that information, but we had the farce at the last Senate estimates, budget estimates, where we got this letter from the NDIA. And it said that because the NDIA, they've got all the data that we want, but because it's actually going to be put in two different documents, the first quarterly report and the AFSR, the Annual Financial Sustainability Report, two of the most critical documents for transparency for this place on an $11 billion per quarter scheme, they said that the agency will therefore not be able to answer questions regarding these documents at its appearance. Now, we made it very clear we don't want to talk about the documents, even though they were late. We want to talk about the data that sits behind it. But, of course, yet again, those opposite hid. So the committee got information. I went to the clerk for advice, and this is what the clerk said. Officers do not have an independent discretion to withhold this information, and this requirement is not overridden by the existence of a statutory obligation to provide the information to another entity. So it was very clear that, and as all in this place know that to be, but still they did not provide that information, and now those opposite and the NDIA are ducking and weaving and trying to do everything they can not to have a spillover, so those in this place, so we can get the transparency of the numbers that sit behind it. So, of course, after estimates, the first quarter report has been published, and it is very clear why they waited until after estimates to publish this quarterly report, because what it does is it gives lie. It gives lie to everything those opposite have been saying about this scheme. Bill Shorten's been out there in the media saying, oh, this scheme is now being moderated. But despite all of the cuts that they are now initiating to participants' plans, remember those opposite? Minister Shorten promised, I won't cut a single plan. There will be no cuts under the government that I'm a minister in. Well, that was so not true. And these are the numbers. Total payments have continued to increase for both drivers of cost, participant numbers and the higher average annual cost per participant. In the last quarter alone, it was $11.5 billion, and no wonder they tried to hide that at estimates and hide the data that sits behind that. And as I've said, they're now ducking and weaving about having any transparency so that we can unpack those numbers. But annualised, that will, on the first quarter alone, will mean the scheme will increase from last year from about $42 billion to $45 to $46 billion. Even with all of the cuts, the blunt cuts that those are now enforcing on scheme members, it is a complete disgrace. So let's have a look at how those two drivers of cost have been increasing. Plan inflation continues to rise with an annualised level now of 12.8%. So much for those opposite and the budget, which is budgeted for 8.5%. And in quarter one alone, there were over 50,000 requests for participant plan reviews. That is now 4,000 a week. So how did those opposite cook the books to make it seem like when the legislation went through that they were fixing the budget? Well, they were not. What did they do? They held over tens of thousands of applications to get into the scheme. They made sure people waited months and months once they were accepted into the scheme to get their payments, which is now what we're seeing flow through in the first quarter. And worse than that, when people have been applying for plan increases for inflation, they sat on them, over 50,000, and that number has now got up to 61,767. And they are now not just waiting for people to ask for plan reassessments because they need the money. But they are also now initiating tens of thousands of